Rain slicked the alley like oil on a corpse, the city's iron, smog scent thick enough to taste. My court summons crumpled in my hand, the ink smearing where rainwater pooled in the creases. I'd just been dismissed for negligence. Another failed surgery. Another life I could. Save the Secluded Observatory loomed ahead, its windows dark, a silent judge. Then I saw it, a sealed videotape, slick with rain, lying where the alley met the observatory's shadowed foundation. The label, printed in stark black, Frederick Lefevre, case number 738, asterisk. The court, seal ink bled into the smog, a crimson stain spreading like a wound. I picked it up. The plastic casing felt cold, damp, the edges sharp against my thumb. I turned toward the observatory, a single, grimy window, the only light a weak candle burning inside. The tape's case clicked open with a brittle snap at inside. The screen flickered to life. Not the sterile courtroom I'd expected, but a carousel. Tinny music played twinkle, twinkle, but backward, notes stuttering like a music box with broken teeth. Each spin of the horses was a slow, unnatural fine creak, creak, creak. The sound distorted, pulling time backward. And there, perched on the carousel's edge, a cat, severely underweight, its ribs like a wire frame beneath patchy, tattered fur. It turned its head toward the screen, toward Twimimai. Its mouth moved, whispering through a voice like gravel dragged over glass, asterisk. She signed the transfer papers. Asterisk, a coppery flood filled my mouth, not blood, coppered copper, sharp and metallic, coating my tongue, my throat. I tasted it, cold and ancient, though no wound bled. My hands trembled as I held the tape closer. The carousel spun slower, the backward music now a hollow thifis, the horses, painted eyes staring. The cat's purr began, a low thrum against my ribs, amplifying the dread, making the copper taste sharper, hotter, asterisk she signed, asterisk it rasped again. The words scraping my nerves. I remembered Clara's hand signing the hospital transfer forms the night she vanished. The ledger ID held in the tape's final frame, the one with her name, Lefevre, Clara, crossed out in red. The carousel music dissolved into static. The screen flickered, the static hissing like a dying wire. Then it resolved, my own hands, holding the medical ledger, Clara's name on the page. The ink blurred, the words swin transfer and sign bleeding into the static. My vision swam. The copper taste surged, a physical weight in my throat. The candlelight inside the observatory, deep velvet shadows, warm orange, began to pulse around the edges of my sight. The static on the tape wasn't just noise anymore. It was a sound I could feel in my bones, a wet, tearing sound, like tissue parting, like a seam splitting open. Rip! The tape's static resolved into a single wet, tearing sound as my vision blurred with candlelight orange. The static on the tape dissolved, leaving a ringing in my ears, a phantom echo of tearing. Candlelight orange bled across my vision, a sickly warmth that pressed against my eyelids. I stumbled, the wet asphalt slick beneath my boots. The observatory loomed, no longer a silent judge, but a gaping maw of shadow. I had to go inside. The air within was thick, a suffocating blanket of dust and decay. The smell was a composite of dried parchment, something vaguely floral, and a deeper, more unsettling scent, tweety like old bones left too long in the rain. The single candle flame cast elongated, dancing shadows, twisting familiar shapes into grotesque parodies. I moved deeper into the archive, the floorboards groaning beneath my weight, a mournful creak, asterisk that seemed to follow my every step. The archive itself was a mausoleum of forgotten lives. Rows upon rows of metal filing cabinets stretched into the gloom, their labels faded and peeling. I ran a gloved hand along the cold metal, the texture rough against my skin. Each cabinet seemed to whisper secrets, a chorus of lost voices. I began to pull files, the metal protesting with a drawn-out fit shriek as I opened them. Case files, each one a testament to someone who had simply vanished. The ledger from the tape. The one with my name felt like a brand against my palm. A clock on a desk in the corner caught my attention. It was an antique, ornate, with a pendulum that swung with a hypnotic rhythm. But the rhythm was wrong. It ticked backward. Tick, tick, asterisk, a relentless regression. The sound grated on my nerves, a discordant counterpoint to the silence of the archive. As I reached for a file labeled Patient C, a searing heat bloomed on my tongue. Copper, Not the cold, ancient taste from before, but a burning, molten sensation. It coated my mouth, my throat, a physical agony that stole my breath. "Your fault, Lefevre." The voice wasn't too loud, but it resonated within my skull, a vibration more than a sound. It seemed to emanate from the clock, from the shadows themselves. I spun around, searching for the source, but found nothing. Only the dust motes dancing in the candlelight, the relentless tick, tick, tick asterisk of the backward clock. Then I felt it, a pressure against my wrist, a weight. I looked down. The cat, it was crouched beside me, its skeletal frame pressing against my arm. Its fur felt like brittle straw, its ribs sharp and prominent beneath the patchy coat. The purr, it wasn't tea, a gentle rumble anymore. It was a throbbing, visceral vibration that resonated through my bones, amplifying the copper taste, the burning in my throat. Prupra, asterisk, a relentless, insistent pulse. I tried to shake it off, but its claws dug into my skin, anchoring it to my arm. I stared at my forearm. The skin was changing. Not a rash, not a discoloration, but a transformation. Tiny, paper. Thin scales were erupting from the flesh, translucent and shimmering in the candlelight. A wave of nausea washed over me, the coppery taste intensifying, threatening to choke me. The scales spread, a creeping, unsettling pattern across my skin. I felt a tremor in my hand, a twitching in my fingers. I stumbled back, knocking over a stack of files. They scattered across the floor with a soft, twanged rustle, revealing more names, more disappearances. I reached for the nearest ledger, desperate for something, anything to ground me. The title read, "Patients Vanished 1919. I opened it, the brittle pages crackling in protest. My fingers traced the faded ink, stopping at a single entry, "Patient C vanished 1919. As my fingertip lingered on the date, the ink began to bleed. Not a gradual bleed, but a sudden, violent surge, the black ink flowing upward, defying gravity. The copper taste became unbearable, a searing inferno in my mouth. The cat's purr intensified, a deafening drone. The scales on my arm spread further, covering more of my skin. The backward ticking of the clock seemed to accelerate, a frantic countdown to something I could comprehend. The bleeding ink formed a new name, rising from the page like a phantom apparition. Elizabeth, the name Simba Elizabeth hung in the air, a phantom echo clinging to the coppery taste that now coated my entire mouth. The scales they were spreading, a creeping tide of iridescent shimmer across my forearm, my hand. The tremor in my fingers intensified, a frantic pulse that mirrored the backward ticking of the clock. I had to move. The cat, a skeletal shadow, turned and darted towards the door. Its movements were unsettlingly fluid, a silent glide across the floorboards. I followed, stumbling over the scattered files, the faux rustle of paper a frantic whisper in the oppressive silence. The observatory's layout was a labyrinth of corridors, each one identical to the last. The candlelight, a sickly orange glow, barely pierced the gloom. The air grew heavier, thick with the smell of iron. It wasn't the faint, metallic tang I'd noticed earlier. This was a cloying, visceral scent, like blood drying on warm stone. Rain began to impact the corrugated metal exterior of the building, a relentless southern thrum that resonated through the walls, vibrating in my teeth. The sound was insistent, inescapable. I pushed through a heavy oak door and found myself in what appeared to be a legal office. Desks lined the walls, piled high with documents. The candlelight cast elongated shadows, transforming familiar shapes into grotesque parodies. The rain hammered against the windows, a deafening clang. Clang that drowned out the ticking of the clock. The cat perched atop a filing cabinet, its eyes gleaming in the dim light, its purr a low, throbbing vibration that intensified the burning in my skin. My vision swam, the candlelight orange blurring the edges of the room. The coppery taste was overwhelming, a searing agony that constricted my throat. I reached out, blindly grasping for something to steady myself. My hand landed on a rolled-up parchment, tied with a faded ribbon. I unrolled it, my fingers trembling. It was a decree. The parchment was brittle, the ink faded, but the words were clear. The observatory owns the missing. The words seemed to vibrate in the air, a palpable threat. The cat's purr escalated, a high-pitched whine that resonated deep within my bones. It felt as though the sound was originating from within my own skull, amplifying the burning sensation on my skin. I looked down at my arm. The scales had spread further, now covering my entire forearm. They weren't just shimmering. They were forming patterns, intricate designs that mirrored the script on the decree, legal script. The aberrant growths pulsed with a faint, internal light, a sickly orange glow that matched the candlelight. The rain against the metal intensified, a furious sued rat-tat that seemed to synchronize with the pulsing of the scales. My skin felt taut, stretched to the breaking point. A wave of nausea washed over me, the coppery taste intensifying, threatening to choke me. The tremor in my fingers escalated into a full-blown spasm. I felt a strange detachment, as if I were watching this happen to someone else, a distant, clinical observer. The cat's purr became a piercing shriek, a sonic assault that threatened to shatter my eardrums. The world began to distort, the candlelight orange bleeding into the shadows. I felt a searing pain, a sudden, violent tearing sensation on my arm. The scales were cracking, splitting open like dry parchment. A single drop of liquid, thick and viscous, oozed from the cracks. It smelled of iron. The rain continued its relentless assault on the corrugated metal, a deafening drum that echoed the frantic beating of my heart. I looked down at my arm again. The cracks widened, the scales flaking away, revealing something beneath. Something other. The air tasted of rust again, a familiar betrayal coating my tongue. This time it wasn't a fleeting phantom. It was thick, viscous, the metallic tang clinging to the back of my throat like a physical obstruction. Blood. I tasted blood. My vision swam, the candlelight orange of the previous room bleeding into the oppressive gloom of this new space. A courtroom. The room was a mockery of justice, a crumbling edifice of decaying grandeur. Dust motes danced in the sickly orange light filtering through grimy, arched windows. Rows of empty benches faced a raised platform where a figure sat behind a warped mahogany desk. The wood groaned under his weight, a low, mournful creak that seemed to emanate from the very bones of the building. He was draped in what appeared to be a judge's robes, though they were tattered and stained, the velvet faded to a disturbing gray-brown. My feet shuffled on the cracked tile floor, the sound echoing unnaturally loud in the cavernous space. The cat, a skeletal frame barely concealed by its thin fur, perched on the witness stand, its eyes gleaming like chips of obsidian fofter. Pruh! The vibration resonated through the floor, up my legs, a tightening coil in my chest. The tremor in my hands was back, a frantic pulse that threatened to shatter the fragile composure I clung to. The figure behind the desk cleared his throat. A distorted sound, a warped echo of human speech, filled the room. It was difficult to parse, a jumble of syllables that seemed to shift and rearrange themselves as I tried to comprehend them. Your control cost her. The words, or something resembling them, hung in the air, heavy and accusatory. The coppery taste intensified, a searing pain that constricted my throat. I pressed a hand to my mouth, a futile attempt to stem the flow. My skin felt stretched taut, the aberrant growths on my arm throbbing in time with the distorted audio. The candlelight orange seemed to pulsate from the scales burning against my flesh. I could feel the heat radiating outwards, a silent scream against the damp chill of the courtroom. I tried to speak, to deny the accusation, but my voice caught in my throat, a strangled rasp. The cat's purr intensified, a low, throbbing vibration that seemed to amplify the distorted audio. Pruh, it wasn't just a sound. It was a pressure, a force that threatened to crush me. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of iron, the smell of old blood and decay. The figure behind the desk spoke again, the distorted audio even more garbled than before. The ledger demands balance. The scales were spreading, the intricate patterns mirroring the script on some unseen ledger. The burning sensation intensified, a searing pain that made me gasp. My fingers were numb, stiff, unresponsive. The cat's eyes narrowed, its gaze fixed on me. It seemed to be whispering, not with its mouth but with its purr. A subtle shift in the vibration, a barely perceptible modulation that conveyed a sense of ancient sorrow, of countless disappearances swallowed by the observatory. Purr. Each pulse felt like a shard of ice piercing my skin. My vision blurred, the candlelight orange bleeding into the shadows. I felt a strange detachment, as if I were observing this scene from afar, a clinical observer cataloging the degradation of my own body. The tremor in my hands escalated into a full-blown spasm, my fingers curling into useless claws. The taste of blood was overwhelming, a metallic tide that threatened to drown me. The distorted audio grew louder, a cacophony of warped sounds that assaulted my senses. The debt must be paid. The cat's purr reached a fever pitch, a sonic assault that threatened to shatter my eardrums. I stumbled backward, blindly grasping for something to steady myself. My hand landed on the cold, smooth surface of the judge's desk. Then, abruptly, the cat's whisper ceased. The distorted audio cut off, leaving an echoing silence that was more terrifying than any sound. The courtroom fell still, the only sound the relentless backward ticking of the clock. Tick, tick. It seemed to mock me, a constant reminder of the irreversible passage of time, of the lives lost, of the debt that remained unpaid. The air in the observatory was thick with the scent of ozone, and something older, something that curled in the back of my throat like a rusted nail. My fingers trembled as I reached for the star chart, the parchment stiff with age, its edges frayed like the nerves in my wrists. The backward clock ticked faster now. Tick, tick, ticker. A staccato rhythm that vibrated through the floorboards, through my bones, a countdown I couldn't hear but felt as a pressure behind my eyes. The cat, still perched on the witness stand, watched me with those hollow obsidian eyes, its purr a low, throbbing hum that pulsed in my chest like a second heartbeat. I traced the inked lines with my fingertips, the texture rough against my skin. The chart was a labyrinth of constellations, but my gaze snagged on the name scrawled in the margin, Elizabeth Lefevre, again, and again, each entry a mockery of precision, a lie in ink. The word Fivoid sat beneath it, stark and final. My breath hitched. The copper taste flooded my mouth, sharp and metallic, and I pressed my tongue against my teeth, tasting blood. The chart rippled beneath my fingers, the ink darkening, spreading like a stain. A phantom bloodstain bloomed across the parchment, glistening under the dim light. I recoiled, but my hand lingered, drawn forward, as if by an invisible thread. The cat's purr deepened, a resonant vibration that shook my ribs, and suddenly I was drowning in the sound of it, in the need of it, as if her absence were a physical weight pressing me into the floor. My vision blurred at the edges, the candlelight orange bleeding into the velvet darkness of the walls, and I realized this wasn't just a chart. It was a map. The ink bled outward, tendrils of black spreading across the parchment like veins, twisting into the shape of streets, of buildings. The observatory loomed at the center, a pulsing black dot. And then, her name again, Elizabeth Lefevre, carved into the flesh of the city. My fingers dug into the chart, the paper tearing beneath my nails, and I gasped as the copper taste became a flood, a river of it, choking me. The cat's purr sharpened, a blade of sound slicing through my ribs, and I felt it. The sloughing. My skin split along the seams of my palms, flaking away in thin, translucent sheets, revealing the deep velvet beneath, a living stain, a wound that wasn't mine. The backward clock's ticking accelerated, a frantic stutter, and the ink on the chart writhed, rearranging itself into a path, a route through the city, leading nowhere, leading Fuffen home. My hands were raw, my fingers slick with blood, but I didn't look away, I couldn't. The cat's whisper coiled around me, a ghost's breath against my neck, and I knew she was here. She was hoined everywhere. The void wasn't a place. It was a font choice, and the ledger was already counting the cost. The filing cabinet groaned under my weight as I dragged it open, its hinges shrieking like a rusted gate in the wind. The scent of iron clung to the air, thick and metallic, the same stink that had followed me since the observatory. Since Wentry had. My fingers trembled as they brushed against the manila folders, their edges worn smooth by time and neglect. The cat watched from the windowsill, her ribs pressing against the glass like the bars of a cage, her purr a low, throbbing hum that vibrated through the desk, through my skull. I pulled the first file, empty, just like the last. The second one was worse, a photograph of Elizabeth, her smile too wide, her eyes too bright, the kind of grin that belonged on a postcard, not in a missing persons report. The date stamp on the folder read *1920*, but the ink was smudged, as if someone had tried to erase it with their thumb. I traced the faded numbers with my fingertip, the paper grainy beneath my skin. The cat's purr deepened, a resonant pulse that made my teeth ache. Then I saw it, the form a missing persons report, its edges frayed like the nerves in my wrists. The name at the top was hers, but the signature was gone, scraped away as if by a blade. My breath hitched. The copper taste flooded my mouth again, sharp and familiar, and I pressed my tongue against my teeth, tasting blood. The cat leaned against the form, her claws tapping a slow, deliberate rhythm against the desk, her hollow eyes locked onto mine. The paper rippled beneath her, the ink darkening, spreading like a stain. I reached for it. The moment my fingers touched the form, the candlelight flared, orange and blinding, searing my retinas. I gasped, my vision swimming, the edges of my sight bleeding into velvet darkness. The cat's purring sharpened, a blade of sound slicing through my ribs, and I felt it, the burning, not in my eyes, not in my skin, but deeper, in the marrow of my bones. My neck pulsed, the lesions spreading like ink across parchment, the velvet darkness creeping up my throat. The form trembled in my hands. A whisper slithered through the room, distorted as if spoken through a funnel of water. Asterisk, you let her go. Asterisk, the words coiled around my spine, a serpent. Hiss, and I recoiled, my fingers digging into the paper. The cat esper deepened, a resonant vibration that shook my ribs, and the form began to crumble. The edges frayed, the ink bleeding into the air, the paper dissolving into ash. I watched, paralyzed, as the document disintegrated beneath my touch. The cat, its claws tapped against the desk, a slow, deliberate rhythm, her hollow eyes never leaving mine. The ashes swirled in the candlelight, a storm of gray and black, and then the ashes settled. And there, in the center of the desk, was a name. Hivayo asterisk. The cat's tail lashed against the doorframe like a metronome set to a rhythm no human ear could hear, just the way I liked it. My fingers traced the cold brass of the handle, the metal singing beneath my touch, and I turned the wheel with deliberate slowness. The hinges groaned, a sound like a man being unstitched from his own skin, and the door swung inward with a breath of damp, iron-rich air. The observatory's annex yawned before me, a wound in the skyscraper's belly, and I stepped inside, my boots scuffing against the linoleum, each step a whisper against the silence. The cat moved ahead, her ribs pressing against the dark, like the bars of a forgotten cage. Her purr was a low, throbbing throbbin, vibrating through the floorboards, through my teeth, and I swallowed hard, the copper taste flooding my mouth again. Always the copper, always the copper, always the taste of what was coming. The room stretched before me, a labyrinth of torn documents, their edges jagged as teeth. The candlelight pooled in the corners, casting long shadows that twisted like smoke, and the air smelled of old ink and something older. Something older, something funwrong. I reached for the nearest page. The moment my fingers brushed the paper, a sound unfurled, a carousel's music, but not as it should be. The horses clattered backward, their hooves kicking up dust in slow motion, their laughter a distorted screech that slithered through the air. The cat's purr sharpened, a blade of sound slicing through my ribs, and I felt it, the footy cutting. Not in my skin, not yet, but deeper, in the marrow of my bones. My neck pulsed, the lesions spreading like ink across parchment, and I pressed my tongue against my teeth, tasting blood. The paper bit into my flesh. A thin, paper-thin layer peeled away from my palm, translucent as parchment, and I gasped, my breath hitching in my throat. The candlelight flared, orange and blinding, searing my retinas, and I recoiled, my vision swimming. The documents writhed in the air, their edges sharpening, and I reached for another, only for it to lash out like a whip, the fibers embedding themselves in my skin. The copper taste intensified, a metallic flood in my mouth, and I spat, the saliva darkening the floor. The cat watched, her hollow eyes locked onto mine, her purr a resonant vibration that shook my ribs. The papers coiled around my wrists, their edges digging in, and I felt the twigrowth of the aberrant. Paper-thin layers forming beneath my skin, the texture of old parchment, the weight of secrets. My vision blurred, the candlelight a searing brand against my eyelids, and I gasped, my hands trembling. A whisper slithered through the room, distorted, as if spoken through a funnel of water. You let her go. The words coiled around my spine, a serpent's hiss, and I recoiled, my fingers digging into the desk. The cat's purr deepened, a resonant vibration that shook my ribs, and the documents began to move, their edges sharpening, their pages folding inward like a flower closing. The carousel's music howled, a screeching wail that drowned out the world, and I clapped my hands over my ears, my vision swimming. The papers swirled around me, their edges cutting, their words bleeding into the air. The copper taste flooded my mouth, sharp and metallic, and I tasted blood again, the saliva darkening the floor. Then, the silence, the documents stilled, their edges smoothing, their words coalescing into a single sheet. The cat's purr faded, a low, throbbing hum, and I reached out, my fingers trembling. The paper read, "Your turn." The vault door hissed open, a drawn-out exhale of stale air and the faint metallic tang of rust. It wasn't a slam, not a dramatic reveal, more like a reluctant confession. The cat, a skeletal shadow, slipped past me, her ribs a stark topography beneath the thin fur. The air within was thick, heavier than the observatory annex, pressing against my lungs like a physical weight. The backward clock mounted on the far wall dominated the space. Its pendulum swung with agonizing slowness, each tick a hammer blow against my pulse, a counterpoint to the frantic beat within my chest. Tick, a denial of forward momentum. Tick, a promise of regression. The room itself was a mausoleum of bureaucracy. Rows of metal filing cabinets stretched into the gloom, their surfaces coated in a fine layer of dust that shimmered faintly in the candlelight. The smell was overwhelming foofing, not just old paper and decay, but something else, something akin to dried blood and ozone. The cat's purr, a low, guttural thrum, resonated through the floor, vibrating up my spine, amplifying the yearning that clawed at my insides. A yearning for what? For Ilara. I moved towards a cabinet, the linoleum cold and slick beneath my boots. The cat followed, her tail a twitching barometer of my anxiety. I pulled the handle. It grated against the metal, a high-pitched whine that seemed to drill into my skull. The cabinet door swung open, revealing rows of manila folders, their labels faded and illegible. I reached for one, my fingers tracing the brittle paper. The dripping began. A slow, insistent fucking plink, 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 echoing in the oppressive silence. I looked up, searching for the source, but saw nothing. The dripping seemed to originate from the paper itself. I opened the folder. The contents were a chaotic jumble of documents, 15 handwritten notes, typed reports, diagrams of unsettling complexity. The words swam before my eyes, a meaningless jumble until I focused. Rituals, procedures, dates, names. My name, a tremor ran through my hand. I found a pen, a heavy ornate thing, and with a sudden reckless impulse, wrote my name across the top of the page. Frederick Lefevre. The ink flowed dark and viscous, and as it did, a sensation bloomed in my hand, fonta. A burning, a searing heat. I looked down. The ink wasn't ink, it was blood. A deep, crimson stain spreading across the paper, seeping into my skin. The cat's purr intensified, a resonant vibration that threatened to shatter my ribs. The air grew thick, suffocating, and the candlelight flickered violently, bathing the room in a lurid orange glow. My skin felt tight, stretched taut across my bones. A network of fissures appeared on my forearm, hairline cracks that pulsed with an inner light. Deep velvet. The color bled from the candlelight, staining my vision, distorting the edges of the room. The dripping accelerated, a frantic fun-plink, plink, plink, plink that echoed the pounding in my head. The documents rustled, a whispering chorus of unseen voices. I felt a pressure building in my chest, a suffocating weight that threatened to crush me. The clock ticked, each swing of the pendulum a mocking reminder of time's relentless march backward. I tried to pull my hand away, but the paper seemed to cling to me, the blood ink binding me to its secrets. The fissures on my arm deepened, widening into cracks that exposed the pale flesh beneath. The yearning intensified, a desperate, clawing need for something I couldn't name, something I couldn't reach. The cat rubbed against my leg, her bony frame a jarring contrast to the burning agony that consumed my arm. Her purr was a low, insistent drone, amplifying the chaos within me. I looked down at my hand, the blood ink now a dark, viscous pool spreading across the page. It was soaking through the paper, seeping into my flesh, becoming a part of me. The dripping reached a fever pitch. So plink, 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 flink. A relentless rhythm driving me toward the edge of something unknown, something terrifying. The orange light intensified, searing my retinas, and I gasped, my vision blurring. The blood ink continued to spread, consuming my hand, and I felt it 20. The final, agonizing surrender. The blood ink receded, a dark tide pulling back from the shore of my skin, leaving behind a raw, throbbing ache. The paper remained, the chaotic jumble of documents still splayed across the metal cabinet. But something was different. A new document lay atop the pile, pristine and white against the aged yellow of the others. A witness statement. My name was scrolled across the top in the same crimson script. Frederick Lefevre. I reached for it, the tremor in my hand lessened but not gone. The cat, a skeletal silhouette, shifted, settling directly on the statement, her bony frame pressing into the paper. Her purr intensified, a high-pitched whine that resonated not just in my ears but deep within my bones, a vibrational hum that seemed to warp the air itself. Prah, prah. A mechanical drone layered over the organic. I unfolded the paper. The words were typed, precise and clinical, devoid of the frantic scrawl that characterized the other documents. She is the key. The sentence was repeated, verbatim, 3 times. A chill, deeper than the vault's inherent cold, settled in my marrow. She Alara. The yearning, that desperate clawing returned, sharper now, laced with a sickening dread. The candlelight flickered, the orange glow intensifying. solidifying into a tangible pressure against my eyes. It wasn't just light anymore, it was a physical force pushing, blinding. I squeezed my eyes shut, but the orange persisted, a searing brand behind my eyelids. A coppery taste bloomed on my tongue, metallic and acrid, coating the back of my throat. Clang. The echo of metal on metal, though there was nothing striking anything. My skin felt wrong, stretched too thin, too sensitive. I glanced down at my arm, the blood ink gone, replaced by a strange, unsettling smoothness. The fissures had deepened, the cracks widening, revealing not flesh, but a darkness beneath a velvis that seemed to absorb the light, the deep velvet. It wasn't a color, it was a void. A taste of it lingered on my tongue. The cat's purr rose in pitch, a keening wail that seemed to vibrate the very foundations of the observatory. Prr, prr. The sound became a physical assault, a sonic hammer blow against my skull. My vision pulsed, the orange light receding momentarily to reveal the cabinet, the documents, the cat Tiwei. All distorted, warped by the intensity of the sound. I stumbled backward, my boots scraping against the linoleum, the sound amplified in the suffocating silence between the cat's purrs. The yearning intensified, a desperate need to understand, to know. But the knowledge felt poisoned, tainted by the burning in my eyes, the taste in my mouth, the creeping darkness beneath my skin. The clock ticked, each swing a mocking reminder of time's relentless, backward march. Tick. A denial. Tick. A denial, tick. I tried to focus on the words, on the statement, but the orange light returned. A suffocating blanket that pressed against my eyes, obliterating everything but the cat. Her eyes, twin points of incandescent orange, burned into my consciousness. I felt a presence vast and unknowable, pressing against the edges of my mind. A voice not spoken but twin-felter, resonated within my skull. The statement began to dissolve. The paper shimmered, the typed words blurring, fading until it vanished entirely, leaving only the cat perched on the empty space, her purr a deafening roar. The deep velvet spread, consuming my vision, my sense of self. The rain began, a relentless drumming against corrugated metal, a sound that seemed to originate not from outside, but from within my own head. Tap, 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 a rhythm of despair. And then a whisper, soft as a sigh, yet resonant with an ancient, terrible power. The cat's purr faded slightly, just enough to allow the voice to cut through. Consume her. As I followed the cat's skeletal frame, her bony tail twitching like a metronome. We navigated the narrow corridors of the observatory, the air thickening with an otherworldly presence. The smell of iron and smog clung to my skin, heavy as a shroud, weighing me down with every step. My heart pounded in time with the clock's backward tick, each beat echoing through my mind like a countdown to oblivion. Tick, tick. The sound resonated deep within my chest, vibrating my very bones. We entered the main chamber, and I was struck by the cacophony of sounds that assaulted me. A carousel melody played in reverse, its notes warping into an unsettling harmony that seemed to claw at my eardrums. Tra-la-la, tra-la-la. The tune twisted, like a living thing writhing in agony, as it merged with the clock's ticking and the cat's purring. The resulting symphony was a maelstrom of noise that threatened to consume me whole. The cat led me closer to the backward clock, its face glowing with an eerie candlelight orange that seemed to sear my retinas. I felt my skin burning as if the deep velvet color had taken on a life of its own, spreading across my flesh like a dark stain. The taste of copper exploded on my tongue, acrid and metallic, making my mouth water in revulsion. I realized with a jolt of horror that I was the amplifier, the catalyst for this twisted ritual. My presence had intensified the entity's power, allowing it to seep into our world like a dark tide. The cat's purring grew louder, more insistent, as if urging me towards some terrible epiphany. The air seemed to vibrate with an eldritch energy, and I felt my mind reeling under its influence. My thoughts were no longer mine, they belonged to the entity now, twisted into grotesque parodies of their former selves. Prah, prah, the cat sound merged with the clock's ticking, creating a rhythm that synchronized with my own heartbeat. As I stood there, transfixed by the burning orange glow, my skin began to seal itself with an otherworldly mark to in a branding iron of deep velvet darkness. It spread across my arms, up my neck, and onto my face, until I was consumed entirely by its abyssal void. The copper taste intensified, coating my tongue like a thick layer of rust. The carousel's warped melody reached a fever pitch, the notes blurring into an ear-piercing shriek that shredded my eardrums. Tra-la-la, tra-la-la. The sound became a living thing, wrapping itself around me like a shroud, squeezing tight until I could hardly breathe. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The clock's ticking ceased, the carousel's music ended in mid-note, and the cat's purring fell silent. In the oppressive stillness that followed, my mind reeled back to Alara Sif, to the transfer papers she must have signed, surrendering herself to this monstrous entity. In the depths of my madness, I thought, she signed the transfer papers.